Good morning. It's Lee Cassidy from Tactile Technology. We normally do our In the Hot Seat in the afternoons around 2 o'clock, but we've got a bit of a break today from the usual tradition because it's Christmas and we're actually knocking on the head at lunchtime. So we thought we'd try and get one last in for the year this morning. So we've got Michael Logan from Atos. How are you doing, Michael?
Morning, Lee. Thanks very much for inviting me along today.
Yeah, so we normally kick off with learning a bit more about our guests and say, I've known you since you were at Zyco and then next at IO after that. But I think we want to start a bit earlier back than that. So tell us where you grew up, a little bit about your time at school, the kind of things you love to do, what you had challenges with, hobbies, interests, what were you going to do with yourself? So, kick us off with that.
Yeah, well, after following Stephen Miller yesterday, my story is going to be quite dull. I mean, he's inspirational. So it was awesome to hear his story, but mine's not going to be quite as exciting. But at school, I went to a normal kind of comprehensive. I guess it was in a kind of semi-poor area in Swindon, where I was born and raised.
I know Swindon well. I was at RF Lynham, just down the road in Wootton Bassett. Yeah. So I'd be there doing my shopping on a Saturday.
Yeah. Well, most of the town centres shut these days, like most of our town centres, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, it was a happy time. I mean, it was a time when a lot of schools converged together, and before you kind of went to your local secondary school, but then they become these massive super schools, and it became really impersonal because I went from a little village primary school to this, huge, terrifying place where 7 or 8 primary schools got lumped into this comprehensive. And frankly, the teachers didn't even know your name most of the time.
It's not good, is it? Not good education if you feel like that.
No, and it was quite difficult. And although I didn't know at the time, I actually was dyslexic. So had big challenges with some of the reading and the writing. And as a result of that, when we went into a tiered session, I was put in some of the lower to bottom kind of classes.
Yeah.
And almost written off in the system, right? So my enthusiasm around education, I guess, waned quite considerably, and I ended up, as no one knew I was there, I just skipped out and went and watched Neighbours every day.
So your specialist subject, if you go on Mastermind, is going to be Neighbours, is it?
Yeah, it's going to be Scott and Charlene. So. But I didn't know much about an awful lot. But one thing that I always retained at school was a massive interest in history, and that was something that really kind of fired my imagination. And you asked me earlier, what did I aspire to do when I was at school? Actually, my ambition was to be a sheet metal worker. That's really, I wanted a trade, and my dad was a production manager, and it was always making something that really kind of inspired me, and that's what I kind of leaned towards. The more kind of practical stuff, I guess, because my learning difficulties when I was younger. So it come, I walked out of school with barely a couple of CSEs and wondering what to do for myself, and I managed to get in a YTS scheme, living my dream as a sheet metal worker, and that's why I thought my long-term career was going to be. And Swindon being a very steeped in manufacturing historically, with kind of Plessy and then the Austin Rover Group back in the day, which is now Mini, and then sort of later Honda, etc. But I thought that was going to be me, and that was going to be my career. But in parallel, I think it's also recognised when I went to college that I wasn't as stupid as maybe the teachers thought I was, and they caught that I was dyslexic, and there was ways to kind of manage that, and so I brought into a program, and I went on to do a HND at college, and then ended up at university studying history, which was always one of one of my favorite things to do, and also business studies. And so I went to the University of Essex, and it was on a scholarship actually through, my parents didn't have an awful lot of money, for a company called Philips Information Systems. So,
I remember them.
yeah, so that was my first foray into the kind of tech world. So sheet metal working went behind me, and I ended up fixing cash point machines. And literally, it was in the days where you had to. A lot of people on this call probably won't remember this, Lee, but you and I will. You had to lift the flap to take your money out, right? And most of my days, and this is early 90s now. Most of my days were unlocking these things because they've been glued down, and people put their cashes in. All the money's been dispensed into these trays, and then someone just come along and just snap it open at night and
took everybody's money.
And took everybody's money. But to be honest, I wasn't very good at that either. There was a couple of incidents where I was dispensing live cash at the high street, and on a blowy day, I particularly remember in Cardiff with it was like that game where the Crystal Maze, when everybody was
they're trying to catch it in the box,
catching the cash. But yeah, no, that was fine times. And my hobbies, you asked me a question, I jumped over that. At school, I did like sports. I liked football, rugby, anything that was a team event. I was quite good at cross country running. But I fell into weightlifting because we had a weightlifting school.
I never thought of you as a weightlifter, definitely.
No. I must have weighed about 6 stone dripping wet, but that is actually to my advantage because it was all about how much you can lift in and around your body weight. So it's clean and jerk and snap. And actually, I did pretty well. I was Wiltshire champion. I got selected for the Commonwealth Games as a school. A Southwest champion. But that kind of all sort of stopped when I found alcohol and dancing. Yeah. And I was also in the TA, but before that in the Army Cadets from the age of 13 until I was till 16, finishing my cadet career as an RSM, which was quite good, and a leadership piece. And that held me in good stead. And then,
like you, I was a cadet. I think I was an air cadet.
Yeah,
and I joined the RAF. But I've been involved with the Air Cadets the last 12 years as a cadet services cadet forces adult volunteer. So I'm currently a warrant officer with the Air Cadet. I'm also a squadron commander as well. So I run a squadron in Solihull.
Fantastic. I mean, it's a great thing.
It is great.
An opportunity. My daughter actually joined the Air Cadets, and she got so much out of it from a confidence perspective as well. It's such a great foundation to do, and learning some of those leadership skills inevitably helped me out where I am today, if I'm honest. So all of these things, you never realize at the time of all these little bits and nuggets you take from life become important, and not always you make the right decisions. But we'd jump beyond my military career, and when I met my wife was quite an interesting time. I was working in a cardboard box factory.
Oh yeah, that's a bit of a change from ATMs, isn't it?
Well, it was. I come out, and then I was thinking, what should I do in my career? And I spent some time at Nationwide on the help desk, on the technology help desk. And it was round about this millennium bug time when they were paying contractors.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So we skipped forward a few years now, but that was great.
I have a little story about Nationwide. I remember I worked for, who was I working for at the time? I think it was IBM, I think it was, or Sun Microsystems around that period. And they used to do, it's topical for the time of year as well, they used to actually pay a bonus to the IT guys based on the fewer amounts of reboots they had to do on their Windows servers. It was all physical stuff then, but they used to actually pay an increased bonus if they hadn't had to reboot every single Windows server every day. Because, back then, Windows wasn't the best from a serving perspective, was it? It's a very different product today than it was then. So I just remember that was something they told us, and you just couldn't believe it. Daily rebooting every single server. So
but they were good. I remember that in Nationwide, they had this big clock with the Millennium Countdown on, right? And it's catching down the seconds, minutes, and days. And they paid us all this money to go and wait for this big event to happen. And of course, when nothing really happened, because most of the hardware had been upgraded at the time, they just let us all go, right?
Because it was all about internal clocks, wasn't it? They were so worried that a lot of the internal clocks, when they got to to that zero, they'd start again. So we'd go back in time rather than going forward. So there was all these issues, wasn't there? Some people must have paid a fortune in consultancy as well, making sure all their equipment and infrastructure would work.
I mean, my wife works in risk now for a bank. She's a senior risk manager. And if they had that challenge now, imagine how much you would have sat on your balance sheet from the bank's perspective. Because they honestly thought that, the clock's going to tick over and that everything's just going to stop. That was really was the ultimate insurance case. But yeah, so that was fun. But when I left there, it was right in one of the recessions, and then I couldn't really find much to do. And I had a friend that was working as a designer in a cardboard box factory, and he said, "Look, we need some part-time help." I ended up doing about 18 months there because it was such fun. It was so, it was just hand to mouth. I didn't really have any outgoings. Had a group of people that used to work with, and was having great fun. And then I met my wife a similar time, and as always happens, right, she said, "Michael, what are you doing with your career?" She used to come and pick me up because I couldn't afford a car and I'd be sweeping the floor, right? And she said, "Look, you really need to have a look in the mirror." And you mentioned it earlier, it's like one of those crossroads in life where, what do I go and do next? And she said, "Well, you've managed to get me, so you must have a bit of the gift of the gab. Why don't you think about sales?" And there was a reseller that was advertising, and the basic was awful, and the commission was pretty awful. But I went and give it a go, and it was and I just had a kind of natural talent for it, Lee. And it was a great time. It was a time we were still selling processor upgrades, and memory was cost a fortune, and you couldn't even really look at everybody else's prices. You had an action catalog that used to sit on your desk, and that's how these compared your prices. So it was almost like stockbroking, because you'd ring up the distributor to get the best price on the day, and we were just shifted tin, frankly. Anything from large compact servers to small memory chips and everything in between. But I remember having great fun there, and after about 3 months, I knocked on my manager's door and I said, "I need to have a chat with you." And he said, "Oh, well, let's go and speak to the MD," because it was quite a small reseller. It was probably about 5 or 6 million a year.
Anybody you can tell us the name of?
Yeah, Westwood. It was called Westwood West. Yeah. It was based near Chiseldom, so it's still local, still not a million miles from where I started. And I knocked on the MD's door and I said, "Look, I've got a proposition for you. Instead of paying me more money, just pay me more commission." Right?
Yeah.
And he said, "No one's ever had that conversation with me before. Everybody normally comes in and asks for more basic after like 3 months." And he said, "Well, that's a bit unusual." And I said, "Look, instead of 12%, I'll take 30%, but you don't have to pay me any basic." Well, that year I earned 6 figures, which was a lot of money then. And then I thought, well, I've obviously got a little bit of a talent for this. And I spent 3 great, fantastic years there being grounded in that industry. And after that time, I saw the business was moving. People had the internet at their fingertips now. They could compare prices. So I knocked on the MD's door again. I said, "We really need to look at services. We need to diversify, because this is commodity sales and margins are coming down and down and down. We're going to find it challenging." And he wouldn't move his business model. So at that point, I said, "Right, I'm going to go off and do this myself." Right. So I started off 0 investment in a company called the Channel IT Services, which I started, and now we're about 2002 and 2002, 2003. And I started the channel IT services, which is a reseller. But where we were different is we focused on those data center moves. We focused on providing support and upgrades, and we did sell the hardware, but it was all with a service, right?
The service was the focus, not the actual product.
Yeah, and that developed to a point that we had customers, instead of just selling the product, we'd even put their ID on. We'd put an image on their laptop. We personalize it. We send it to the individual site. So it's kind of pre-wrapped. We could even send an engineer if we wanted to, and we got some really big contracts with the likes of the National Trust and May Gurney, and some large maintenance contracts as well, with a lot of colleges and universities as well. A lot in West Wales, which is not too far down the M4 for me, but quite remote, Pembrokeshire and Carmarthenshire. But yeah, no, it's really a good time walking into that business. So I did that for 6 years, and we were really successful. So I didn't put a penny in. In the first year, we did something like 300K, but by the time we left, it was in the millions. It was 3.5 to 4 million as a business.
That's good after such a short period of time.
Yeah, and there was only ever 6 of us doing it. So and then I was fortunate enough to be able to sell the business. So I sold out to my business partner. And I decided to go and do my next venture, which was, and I wasn't in a rush to do anything, Lee, if I'm honest. I had this mission about I was going to dig myself a new drive, because my gravel drive in the summer would just get covered in weeds. So I was out there in the winter, and I was terrible at this, like filling these wheelbarrows with his gravel. And that was me. I just needed, running your business is 24/7, right? Everybody else gets paid before you do. It's really, really stressful. So this was my release, but it wasn't much of a release, because after about 4 weeks, I had a guy called David Gorton-Fenzi give me a call and said, "Look, we've got this role."
Yeah, I know David well as well.
Diversifying into new technologies, because historically they'd been selling GBIX and Cisco stuff, and they were looking at bringing some new technologies in, and wanted someone to come along, be a product manager, and start in that space. And that sounded really exciting, because it was all around new technologies, which I was always technology focused. And I think we were the first distributor for Huawei at the time. So I was the first kind of product manager for Huawei, and then Force 10 was really exciting time with the explosion of.
It was one of my business's first times we'd sold enterprise equipment, because we'd gone from doing a lot of work around software as service, learned a lot about VMware, and then we'd started working with Zyco and looking at the Huawei, and we sold 2 Huawei blade server and storage arrays into Logitech. One in Austin, Texas, and one up in Manchester. So that was our first foray and our first relationship. We'd actually started talking to the Zycos a little bit before, because they used to be a reseller for Polycom phones, and we also did telephony, and that's why we had that first relationship. And then we used that relationship then to look at some of the enterprise products.
And to be fair, they were very forward thinking in terms of technologies, and it's like all these things, some of them really flew. Riverbed was one of those.
Very much.
And then obviously some of the others, didn't kind of kick on. So, but it was a great time there. It was a really good learning curve for me. I kind of so I went from understanding a reseller and how to run a business to understanding the complexity of working in a channel type organization and how to leverage that. And it was a really successful time for me. I did have a personal challenge, actually. And we talked about Christmas, and unfortunately you had some losses recently, but roundabout, it was the week before I was supposed to join in Zyco. So I was supposed to join on the 4th of January. It's supposed to be my first day. And then unfortunately, my son tragically got killed on Christmas Day. So he got run over by a drunk driver walking across a crossing. So although, you know, I think it will always be overshadowed because I was trying to cope with joining a new job and also this exciting new opportunity, but also not realizing the mental effect that major event had on me. And what I did is I kind of suppressed it, if I'm honest, and I just got on with things because I had a really young family to support. My son was 12 months old and my daughter was 18 months old at the time. So young family to support. And that was the worst thing to do. And then I ended up with about a post-traumatic stress disorder and that kind of carried on through a big portion because I didn't really know what it was, right? Because
I think a lot of people in the early days didn't understand, you know, what this was. You know, looking at military type, you know, people have been in conflict, they didn't understand what it was there. But then, you know, any type of trauma, you know, like loss of a child, is just the same, and it triggers the same, you know, issues within a person than, you know, if it was involved in something that was military. Yeah, it's no different.
And luckily, I've managed to get some help from Professor Gordon Turnbull, who's the guy who's actually RAF, right? And his background was Terry Waite, so he brought Terry Waite back when he had his from his trauma, and amazing guy, and really helped me through a difficult path. But it took a long time, if I'm honest. That you know, we talk about mental illness much more openly now, but back then it was almost you know, like in the 80s, if you had a bad back problem, right? People would just say you were just trying to pull one, and I didn't materially let it affect my work life, but I think when I look back, I think that was a really, really tough time, and certainly if anyone's going through anything from a depression perspective or any of those trauma type incidences, go and seek some help, right? Honestly, there's no stigma attached to it anymore.
No, definitely not.
And go and get some help, because you know, it's as important as your physical health, 100%.
Well, it can be worse, because again, people can't see it. You know, if your arm's hanging off or something, it's quite easy to see. But if you've got some kind of mental illness that's affecting you and causing you difficulties, it's very difficult for anybody else to know unless you talk to people. And also the outcomes of it, especially people who take their own lives because of it, are quite serious. Normally, like I say, something you can see, people will understand and can deal with, but people that can't see these things, and it's difficult for them to support you. You need to reach out and speak to people and get help. And I think hopefully nowadays people are more open, aren't they, to discuss it, which many years ago they didn't.
100%. So if there's one takeaway from this session, please, anyone listening, if you're suffering at all, please go and seek some help. There's lots of people that you can just call up and pick up the phone and speak to your loved ones about what you're going through. That's the first thing is talking about it. So Zyco, and I've found an opportunity at Next.io, which
we worked together on. We worked to try and put some Next.io into an MSP, didn't we? Blue chip,
wasn't it? Yeah. And I think we've come really close, and that would have been a brilliant reference for us. But I think it was a great product, and it was adopted by Dow, and I think that's really what their opportunity was to OEM their product. If I'm honest, I think trying to get market traction in that space, and it had to be at scale, was always going to be a challenge. But we did really well. We took the business from 0 to 15 million in a couple of years. We were the most successful region outside the US, but I think it was one of those technologies that was a moment in time, and the experience of being in a startup was completely different. Although it's quite similar from an entrepreneurial perspective to having your own business, right? It is that you're the first person on the ground. And I think that's kind of where in my DNA, it's that startup type mentality. And that played really well. So, and now I understood how to create a channel. I understood how to create a business, and bringing those things together and being able to exploit that from a startup perspective was a great fun time. And I worked with some amazing people. And in fact, we come really close to being acquired by Samsung. And then I could have flown off in my helicopter and given up work. But unfortunately, it appeared that they didn't own some of the IP, and it was owned by Dell. So that opportunity left. Then I moved in. My first step into HPC, into Mellanox. So from a startup to a vendor in the high performance computing space, and that was quite a steep learning curve because it is a very unique market, but it is at the high end, and some of the principles and concepts were very similar around networking and big servers, and that's fundamentally what they are, big servers. And that was a fantastic time for me. So I had a couple of years there, and then I got poached from a guy that I worked with, IBM. The guy's name was Andy Grant, and Andy was at IBM, and he moved to a company called Bull Technologies, and he said, "Look, I know I've worked with you, Mellanox. Any chance I can? I've just joined this fantastic company." And within a week of him joining, they got acquired by Atos.
I remember Bull when they used to manufacture mainframes.
Exactly, we still do now.
Yeah.
Mainframes and stuff. We're still doing some of that now in our big data space. So there's a big acquisition from Atos, and I interviewed with the CEO for the UK, and within about 2 weeks he was gone, and Andy had been asked to step into his shoes. And so he hired me in, and I was just going in as a kind of salesperson, but he hired me in as a sales director. So I was a sales director, and I turned up, and this is where I am today. And it's quite a journey. When I turned up, we had 4 salespeople. They just missed the 4 million target by $1 million. So it's a very small business, but they were looking for someone to pick it up by the ears and kind of run with it. And I landed in a division called BDS, which is Big Data and Security. And fundamentally, it was a division that was created out of Bull. So the whole Bull team really moved into this division within Atos, because Atos was looking for someone to bring some innovation, some new technologies, some different skill sets, because I think the managed service market was becoming more and more price focused. Where's your differentiation come from? Well,
yeah, and that's still the same today, isn't it? It's that differentiation about what you offer is what makes the difference, rather than just on price. Because if everybody negotiates based on price, it's just a downward circle, isn't it?
And that's exactly, you hit the nail on head, Lee. That's exactly what happened, right? So I think they were really smart. They saw that data was exploding, and so the systems and the high performance computing bit that Bull brought, as well as the big data and the cybersecurity portfolio. I mean, at the time, Atos was number 4 in the world for cloud services. And then Bull in Europe was number 7. So together they moved them up behind the kind of big 3 across Europe.
Yeah.
So from an acquisition perspective, it's quite cool. And for me, it was wonderful because I was able to have the startup mentality, because it was a small company within this massive organization doing, billions of euros a year, and all the resources and assets that brought. So, and it was a really easy fix for me. Is what I found is we were just being so reactive. Lee, that was the trouble. We were waiting for the RFP to come in and wondered why we always come second.
Yeah, because if you're not already talking to the customer, there's no chance of securing it.
So how are you influencing it? So, and this resonates today. Is the first thing we did was we hired some salespeople that got ahead of those RFPs coming out, and then guess what? We've influenced it. We sold them the differentiation, which is Atos and Bull together, and then suddenly we've exploded. So if I roll forward from then, and I'll kind of backfill in a minute, but if I roll forward from there to give you an idea of the scale of the business today, I've got 40 salespeople across Northern Europe today, and we're going to be in excess of 400 million, right? So we've taken the business from 3 million to 400 million in the 6 years that I've been here.
Yeah, we've also gone from 1 million per salesperson to 10 million per salesperson as well, which is a big difference, that multiplier.
It is, and I guess the big question is how do we do it, right? And how we did it is so we had 4 areas that sat within my remit. The first one was high performance computing. The second was cyber security. The third one was big data. And the fourth one is this bag of bits we call mission critical systems, right? And what's in that is amazing, from satellite monitoring to IRD detection, all sorts of stuff, mainly French centric, if I'm honest, right?
Yeah.
So we focused on the cyber security, and we said, okay, Atos are doing these big complex IoTs and BPOs. Where's the cyber element in them? So we made sure that we sold the cyber element as a differentiator in those bids. Right, so if you suddenly do 100 million IoT, 10 million in cybersecurity is really attainable, right? It's only a percentage of the sale, but actually it's where the customers. It's a perfect timing to talk about the market coming towards us, right? They needed to know, the customers needed to know they were protected and how we were going to protect them from an organizational perspective. And
it's extremely important now than ever, isn't it? Cybersecurity. We were talking earlier about Log4j and that impact that's had. But, if we go back over the last 12, 18 months, there's been lots of different issues. We had that issue where SolarWinds had been effectively infiltrated, and then that exploit had been then put into other customer systems and things. There's been some amazing cybersecurity issues.
WannaCry was horrendous.
Yeah, WannaCry, yes. Yeah.
I mean, when you're shutting down hospitals and E&Es and people are being held to ransom, I mean, it's almost something like out of a Netflix robot program or whatever it was, right? So iRobot. I mean, it was... and that's when the kind of light was turned on by a lot of these organizations, wondering how they're going to mitigate the risk and how do they obtain these skills to be able to pick these up. So you had 2 options, I guess. One is to create your own team, to build up the skill sets, to build up all the artifacts and credentials to do it. Or the second one is to outsource it and have someone help you to do that. And that... and we talked about it earlier, it's about a lot of business at this point is moving towards cloud or hybrid cloud, right? So how do you bring those things together? Well, how you bring them together is by doing an end-to-end security offering, right? So we're number 1 in EMEA now, and number 2 globally from a managed service perspective, from a security perspective. And how we did that is we were doing anything from these PKI cards around IDAM, because it's all about identity, right up to eyes on screens in cleared customers, right? So we've got the whole portfolio in between, and that gives our customers the confidence that we can deliver what we need to support them. But that was the first thing we did, is to make sure that cyber was in all those bits. The second thing we did is we went into our existing customer base and we did a maturity assessment of where they were from a security perspective. And we talked about what outcome they needed as a business. We talked about outcomes and the importance of outcomes earlier. And that's all we sell, is we sell customer outcomes. And what cyber maturity levels they need to be at to meet the business outcome they're trying to achieve. So that was really lucrative for us. So always farm, in your own back garden. It's so we did that, and then the third thing that we did is really partner with people. So I think that's the next big key for us is making sure that we've got the right partner network. Some of it's kind of the big 4, some of it's the larger type other ISs, even working with people like IBM, etc. And some of it actually in our product side is working with the more agile channel type partners as well, which that we need to exploit. So that's another opportunity for us to grow, and quite an exciting one. But I really see security changing that conversation. When I talk to the CIOs, and Atos protect, the Olympics, they protect the BBC, the Met Police, and big commercial customers like Aviva and Aegon, etc. So, but where I see those conversations are, when I speak to their CIOs, is they'd like the problem just to go away, right? They'd like to consume it, right, on a consumption type model as a service. And whether I talk about HPC, or whether I talk about big data, or whether I talk about computer vision, or whether I talk about cyber security, that's really where the market's going towards. Is people want to consume things on a consumption type model, because then they don't have to invest in the skill sets. They offset the risk, because the risk is the bit that sits on their balance sheet. Yeah,
that's the trouble a lot of people have, is one, like I said, we spoke about before, limited skills and experience to be able to implement something in the first place. But secondly is, how do you actually mitigate that risk in some way? Especially if you're early days, it's much better to take someone else in who can actually deliver it with the level of services, like Siemens SOC. A lot their technologies people used to use quite a lot in the past, but the technology and the cost of implementing was so high, plus also the people costs were so high, most people didn't do it, because it wasn't really feasible.
100% agree. And then as soon as you implemented it, the market changes, right? Because people are talking about automation and analytics now. We acquired a company called Palladium, which does an MDR platform. So it's on about, whereas before in the market, we've always talked about what do we do once we've been breached. It's put a big sticker on it, a big plaster. And now we're talking about how do we prevent being breached in the first place through introduction of technology. So I definitely see that's where the market's going towards in cyber, and HPC. It's the same. HPC has always been really historic on-premise. I've got this box to do this job, but actually we've just won an opportunity with Rolls-Royce, and we were talking around engines earlier. That's how I knew a little about that. And the Tempest, the new, I know this is close to your heart, Lee, so I've been saying.
Oh, yeah, definitely the Tempest. The reuse of an old aircraft name as well.
Yeah, so I knew this would excite you. But we're working as a part of that consortium with MBDA, who's a customer of ours already, and BAE Systems and Rolls-Royce. But Rolls-Royce have just decided to use HPC as a service to develop their defense capability around Tempest. A huge system, but instead of consuming it on site, it's going to be held in an Atos data center, and they're going to consume it and run jobs on it to give them the outcome and pay for the outcome, as opposed to just buying a big lump of tin, is what's happened historically. So I can see, and that's the first time I've really seen that commercial space. So I've seen in HPC stuff go from moving into small departments in universities into big campus systems, and then national infrastructure, and then obviously Atos run ECMWF, which is the big European weather system. But then the Met Office have just signed a deal as well for hundreds of millions, in fact $1 billion, with Microsoft to develop capability around weather systems. And actually that stuff is fascinating, because for every pound they spend on that system, they get 3 back, right? Which, who would have thought it, right? From predicting what shops have in their stores in Tesco's, because it's barbecue time, to military operations, to flight planning. Remember the big thing with the volcanoes, with the black ash.
Oh yeah, the ash and everything.
Back in. So those things are becoming really, really prevalent. And then on the big data side, it's really around how to use those analytics a bit more strongly. So So stuff like how do you prevent people, and what the at station, for instance, someone's going to jump in front of a train. How can you identify that really quickly through facial recognition, terms of actions? What by having edge computing, because now we're moving away from the cloud into edge, and processing that data more quickly. Can we stop a train quickly enough to prevent those sort of incidents happening? Whether it's border control, whether around immigration, it's a whole raft of stuff around citizen security that we're seeing in that space as well. So
because that's a big change. So we spoke briefly about technology change, and I've seen a lot of technology change, because if we go back to the world as it was back in the 1980s and 90s, it was all around, you had big boxes, and these big boxes had one job to do. Then we started moving into the noughties, and we were getting virtualization was starting to come to the front, and by 2010, most people were doing virtualization. We're at that step change now into a different world of containers, aren't we? I'm moving towards that, and Kubernetes and orchestration, and there's a lot of change going on there. And again, that's a big challenge for a lot of organizations, because having the skills and experience to be able to deploy it, having the ability to secure it, is going to be a real challenge. But when you come to edge computing, it's one of those technologies that's going to make a major difference. Having the ability to deploy applications to the edge to be able to do things like facial recognition, things for safety on stations, but also delivery of applications, or even gaming through 5G networks, because people are starting to consume through different mechanisms nowadays. Before, we used to all games were on consoles, weren't they? Well, in my day, you remember the pushing cartridge, and you got your Atari going. Nowadays it's all streaming and things, and getting to the power that you need for streaming, especially with you've got such high performance rendering. Edge computing is going to be a major part of that. So I can see some major changes in the way things are done through technology, including not orchestration just of software, but there's a big thing now about having the ability to orchestrate a composable hardware. Setting up infrastructure with the right number of processors, memory, and things, but orchestrated through software definition. So some quite interesting things coming. So what do you see as the future then for Atos? Where you going with that?
Yeah, so I think from the HPC side, it's around AI, right? So I think AI is going to be more prevalent in quantum computing as well. You talked about real game changers. I think quantum computing is going to be one of those. What does the world look like in the quantum world is really interesting. So I think Atos are at the forefront of that from a cyber perspective. I think it's going to narrow, and I think that historically, when I talk to customers, they've just brought boxes and they don't really know how to use them and stuff. So I think that there is a place for someone to bring those expertise in place, and from big data, I think it's a continuation of just moving with the trends, right? You talked about gaming, but yeah, being able to process, health stuff, so on site without that lag of going over the internet. I think technology is always going to change, but it's how your business adapts to encompass it, I suppose. For me, Atos is really well placed to do that, and I think that it's got some great customers. But I think that, like every organization, we need to change, and sometimes large organizations are like large tankers. They're difficult to move, and an organization like you, the speedboats, and I think we need the speedboats as well as the tankers, definitely.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's driving a lot of change is automation at the moment. And we've got two types of automation. We've got the automation of automating the people-driven processes. So imagine, the process you go through for, applying for a mortgage and all the checks that are done, and it's all people-based. There's that, robotic process automation around that people piece. But there's also the automation around all the infrastructure and how things operate afterwards. And I think automation gives you two things. It gives you one, a higher performance, but also not only for the period that people would normally work, but 24 hours a day, you're getting that same level of performance. But I think the other thing is consistency. And I think that's a real thing. You've got to be careful you to get the consistency right, because being consistently wrong is not a good idea either. But consistency is critical, isn't it? Especially in a lot of businesses these days, especially when things are going really, really quickly.
I think that's a really valid point, and automation and how we consume things as well, right? It's just these things, right?
Yeah.
My last mortgage application I did on one of these, right?
Yeah.
And the days of going into a bank and sitting there having a 3-hour, 4-hour form filling exercise and interview have gone. So
yeah.
So inevitably it will be driven by us, right, as human beings. So will dictate what we need from a technology point of view.
That's this term that a lot of people have been talking about the last couple of years, digital transformation, isn't it? And I would have thought Atos are at the front of that as well, aren't they? Yeah, because digital transformation makes a big impact to a lot of organisations. But the thing is, if you do it well, it'll drive your business forward. If you do it badly, it'll actually hold you back. And a lot of people think that what you do is you just replicate everything you did before in digital in the same way. But really, sometimes you have to look at what needs to change as it moves into this digital world. But also some of the key things in there is, one, performance, and secondly, availability. Because if everything's digital now, and your internal users that consume these services, as well as your external consumers, so you're doing your mortgage application on your phone or whatever, it needs to work for them. And I think the problem we've got these days, reputation impact from a cyber attack that stops services being available, or even a technical misconfiguration or a physical outage is a real issue. I think the other side of it, though, is it's so easy now to move to somewhere else. You're in the middle of doing your shopping on Sainsbury's and they have an outage, and then you move to Asda, and then you stay with Asda from then onwards. We're becoming quite fickle with services that are delivered to us because it's so easy to move from one to the other, isn't it? Yeah, and I think digital transformation, you've got to do it right to make sure that you keep the customers and deliver the service levels that you had before, the performance, and make them happy. But you also need to keep redeveloping, reinventing yourself as you go forward as well.
Well, otherwise you're not relevantly, are you? That's the challenge.
No.
How do you stay relevant in a market that's always changing because of that fickle element? I mean, how many high street stores have we seen we've lost, right? Because they've not been able to adapt. The ones that have been successful, like John Lewis, the ones that have been able to adapt to a new digital world. So
yeah, well, we've had some businesses that would have to go, though. We don't take our film into Boots to have it developed anymore. Mm-hmm. So there's no world for people to be manufacturing film for cameras anymore. Who buys cameras? The actual number of cameras purchased these days is minimal, because most people carry one, like you say, in your pocket. It's a mobile phone that does, in fact, much better photographs than most cameras that we used to have in the past. So life moves on and things change, don't they?
They do.
Yeah.
They do. And we have to adapt with them, even at our age.
It. I know, that's it. It's hard to think, because I'm 60 next year, so it's interesting. It's interesting when you're looking, a span of what you've done and the time you've done it over. Like I say, in my days, first getting into computing was around flight simulation in the 1980, and people didn't have computers at home. Very few businesses had computers in the business. It was a mainframe if you had a computer, and who could afford a mainframe back then? Very few people, or even the power it consumed. The electric bill would be too much for a lot of businesses. But nowadays, computers, are throughout our lives in everything we do, aren't they? We've got at least 2 or 3 computers that we utilize all the time. A phone, maybe a tablet, a computer, a laptop. We've got computers in our cars. We've got computers in our TVs. Everything's got a computer these days. And, I don't think we could go back to not having them.
Yeah, but it always frightens me because I live a bit in the countryside and the Wi-Fi is not very reliable. And then I realized that I can't cook my dinner because it's all connected. I can't use the dishwasher, and the washing machine won't work. And
yeah, I've got lighting, all the lights are lights, so you can't turn the lights on and off if you've got no internet and things. Or it's different, isn't it?
TV because there's no aerials anymore. So we've created a rod for our own back. But
that's it. So what's the future hold for you and for Atos then? I know earlier you said that you're not planning on going anywhere else, so you're going to be there to retirement, you think?
Yeah, if they keep having me.
Well, if you're being as successful as you sound like you are, why would they not?
Well, I'm all right for the minute. But in sales, you're only as good as your last half is the average. But no, we've doubled the business year on year. And some, and that's the ambition. I've just created a 3-year plan. I run sales from Northern Europe, but I'm also interim head of digital security. So that's a new challenge, which is a fresh one for me. I run the UK for BDS as well. So seeing the operational side and for me, it's having that vision, having that goal, delivering against a plan, and we have a really strong plan, really strong portfolio. But all important, and what we cannot forget in this thing is the people that make you successful, right? So investing in those people, helping them, because we are fickle, right? People and the market is really strong at the moment. So you've really got to value and nurture and go back to those old days of, people not being a commodity, but being the heart of the business. So I think if we do the right things from a management perspective, we continue to invest, and we have to, and that means acquisition as well. We have to acquire sometimes to bring new technologies into the business. So as long as we carry on that path, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else, and hopefully they stay with me until I'm ready to retire, Lee. That's where I'm heading.
Sounds good. Well, we've come up with about 50 minutes in now, so it's gone very, very quickly the last 50 minutes, having a good chat. So thanks ever so much for telling us a bit about it. We put a couple of banners up, so if you want to look at Atos's website, that's on there. There's also Nexeo. I'm not sure if Nexeo is still around.
No,
that's just a bit of history.
Yeah, that is history, unfortunately. But Atos, BDS, that's the place to look at. That's
it, BDS. Yeah, and then across the bottom, Rachel and I are always looking for more people to join us and tell us about their story and what they're doing and where they've got to. So if you're interested in letting us know a little bit about yourself and joining us, we've got slots in the new year. We've got quite a lot of people booked up through January and into February, but we should be able to find something. And again, Michael, if you know anybody who'd be interested in joining us, please point them in our direction. But any other things to cover before we close things up for the day?
No, just the one thing we didn't talk about was the pandemic. I suppose.
Oh yes,
and the impact that's had from working from home and everybody being secure at home. But we can save that for another chat offline. Lee,
definitely. But one thing I've introduced recently in these in the hot seats is 2 questions that you've got to answer for me. So one is, what's the best meal you've ever had, and where did you have it? And the second thing is, what's the most adventurous thing you've ever done?
Oh wow, okay, that's a good one. So the best meal I had was really recently, actually. We've all been locked down, and I've employed hundreds of people. So we have acquired businesses and people that I've never met, right? So we acquired someone called Motive in the Netherlands, and I went over and I got a small window that I was able to go and meet the team over there. And we went to an amazing restaurant, and if all their food is like that, it's fantastic. And it's stuff, and why it's very memorable, because it's stuff that I wouldn't have normally chosen. Right, I went outside my comfort zone, and it had stuff like venison, and there was a lobster dish that I wouldn't have chosen, and it was a sit dinner, and I'm glad it was one of my greatest or favourite dining experiences I had. And what was the second question?
What's the most adventurous thing you've ever done? It could be anything. We've had somebody on a jet ski by a shark. We've had all sorts of things so far.
Yeah. There's probably lots. Some of it I couldn't tell. But
yeah, yeah. Let's stay clean, please.
Yeah, stay clean. I've done lots of things from parachute jumps to swimming with sharks and all that kind of stuff. But I guess the place that I felt most uncomfortable is that I actually was a football coach for a girls team for like 7 years, and they were super successful. And I know it wasn't like living on the edge, but that cup final was probably racing more than parachute jumps. And I've recently run my first half marathon. I was really nervous at the start, but that cup final for them, because
was the heart racing a little bit, was it?
Sorry? It was
your heart racing?
Oh, yeah, and luckily they went on to, but because those girls had such an expectation, and it was their lives, and it, you could see it in their faces, and it meant so much to them all. And I think that was it, because it felt like it was on a knife edge.
Yeah, that's it.
So probably not extreme, but probably that, and that recent half marathon I did after, because I didn't do any running until COVID, and now that's kind of my release.
We were talking earlier, a lot of people have started to get outside, walking, cycling, running, things to try and, one, get a bit of life back, because sat inside looking at four walls, sometimes we never see a real person, for hours maybe, or in days for some people. So, but thanks ever so much for joining me today. It's been great to have you on, and great to catch up, and also to learn a bit more about, your past and what you've been up to, and also what the future lies. It sounds really interesting. If anybody does want to catch up with Michael, I'm going to put a link in the LinkedIn post, so you can get that. I'll also send Michael over a copy of the YouTube recording, so we can pass that around, so you can get hold of him. And Michael's LinkedIn details are on the screen at the moment. But thanks ever so much. If you hang on afterwards, and we'll just have a quick wash up once we've closed the actual stream off.
Brilliant. Thanks for the forum to speak about me.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.